Just like feeding chickens.
Pardon?
Like feeding chickens.
Well,
And other things about
feed. Chickens need feed. And they call it a chicken chart because they use it on chicken, but it's actually an element, input, output, or let's see, needs and products. There's other ways of saying it. Who's got, hey Jen, who has a clock that can be our timekeeper for this?
I am.
Where are you?
We will. Back here, I'll give you 5.
Yeah, at 15 till, let us know, and because, hey, did Sandy Cruz come here and we didn't notice? Hey, is there a place where we could put that?
Well, I'll just hold it up, Becky.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually a hat.
Thank you.
Okay, well, and it actually says it's 10 after 11. That's not going to be very helpful.
Well, we can convert.
It should be like right
Okay,
at
thank you,
10.
everybody. We're breaking for lunch. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay, can you all see this? As best we can. We can close more of the curtains and leave the door open. Welcome to the 4th Colorado State Permaculture Convergence. We are making progress, and I really want to thank the organizers, which is Lynn, Tana, and Elizabeth, Tana and Elizabeth are probably still outside. But great job, great people. We're getting a great base underneath us. I'm really excited to see the people from the Western Slope, Ned, and, oh, I forgot her name, wherever she is, and then the people from Utah, which is great, because this isn't really about the Front Range of Colorado. It just happens to be where it's been for the last 4 years. So we would love to have it at Crimpy next year if Jerome is okay with that. He has a great site for those of you who haven't been to Crimpy. And Telluride's doing a lot of things, so there's, it doesn't always have to be here, although this is a great venue. My name is Becky Elder. I'm with Pikes Peak Permaculture and Transition Manitou. And this is
Brian Fritz. We're co-directors of Pikes Peak Permaculture, which is its 10th year in the Pikes Peak region this year. And a transition town, Manitou Springs, which is a little community just west of Colorado Springs. It's its 4th year, but we basically serve the Pikes Peak region in terms of transition town, have been for about 4 years.
That's enough. If you want to know more about us, you can meet lunch with us. And we are talking about designing for disaster. So Brian's going to take over in just a second, but I wanted to ask, what do you think our biggest potential disaster is?
Economic collapse.
Drought.
Fire. Economic collapse.
Economic collapse,
Say that again.
drought, and there was one over here.
Fire.
Fire is a big one.
We know fire.
Well, we talked
Population.
population. These are all true disasters. Food, water, all kinds of things. And Brian and I were talking on the way up, and we kind of decided, and this is just our decision, that our civilization is the biggest disaster happening now.
Yes.
And so this is all part of, waking ourselves up. We have to step into this. We have to save ourselves, in case you haven't got there. This is all about self-rescue. Even though you're helping your neighbors, you have to be aware. And how many of you guys have neighbors that are as aware of you as you are? Oh, a few. You're doing
Most of you.
good.
That's
We should all live with these people. Okay.
Okay.
Right. Now, how are we going to do this?
I'm not sure.
Let me tap it?
Well, you can tap it, or I'll tap it. Why don't I tap it
All right.
as we go
I'll
along?
just stay out of the way.
I'll tap it. So what do we see up here? Can you see this? What kind of events? We call these disasters, but these are actually events. What do we see? Can you just call
Flood.
it flood? Yeah?
Too many people.
Nuclear reactors.
Yes. Look at this one.
Economic collapse.
Drought.
Drought.
Wow.
Or dead animals.
Nukes. You can't see this. These are nukes.
Yeah, so these are all, I just want to start out with this, well, come on. Okay, I want to make, the first note I want to make is that disaster, there are no disasters in nature. Okay, disaster is a human concept. Disaster is actually something that emerges in our awareness, in our conceptual awareness. It's overlaid on what's happening. There's no real disasters that happen in nature. Nature is balanced. and flows, and everything that actually happens in nature serves every other part of nature fluidly. So disaster is really a human concept. It's really human-centric, right? I mean, if we get flooded out, we get flooded out. I get flooded out. The human gets flooded out. So we call it a disaster. And it's appropriate, actually, for planning purposes, to look at these things and actually, label it. But I want to start out by just making, having that awareness that there are no real disasters in the natural world. There are really actually no real disasters in the human world. We're going to talk a little bit about the two types of disasters, natural and man-made. And even man-made disasters are just feedback. We're just getting feedback. It's that principle, self-regulation and accept feedback. Even man-made disasters are just giving us feedback about how we're functioning. The first thing I want to point out, we can't really design for disaster if we can't look at it. We have to be able to observe what we want to look at and be aware that there's a potential disaster emerging. Now, the psychology of disaster for most of us, almost all of us, certainly collectively, is dominated by psychological denial. We hate to look at disasters. We hate to think of things that, that might affect us in what we would term a negative way. So our egoic personal sense of self has really these massive structures of denial that disallow us, for the most part, of looking straight at a situation and sort of seeing it as a potential disaster to begin with, and then actually being able to mitigate for that disaster, which is what permaculture design for disaster is about. It's about seeing potential disasters and then actually using our creativity and intelligence to actually design infrastructure to mitigate the disaster or to actually eliminate it altogether, particularly if it's man-made. So, denial leads to avoidance, okay, and avoidance usually leads to not being properly prepared for the disaster. There are a number of principles and ethics about the actual designing for disaster. First principle is that the first principle is the most important thing is we save lives. And the secondary is taking care of our property or saving property. I mean, this is almost obvious, but it's good to point out. We want to be able to plan for disaster ahead of time. Okay, obviously. Again, the egoic denial that we have to deal with to even look at potential disasters tends to frustrate this principle. Particularly, we see this in our collective, communities. We see this in our nation. I mean, we've been talking about climate change and for decades, and even now, climate change has sort of become somewhat of a front page sort of in a sense reality. 98 out of 100 scientists recognize the actual valid fact of climate change, that our industrial behavior is having a negative influence on the climate. And yet nothing is being done. The truth is nothing is being done. Absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
Absolutely nothing. I mean, you hear little things here and there, but the scope of the problem, nothing is being done. That's because people have this psychological denial.
Right.
It's huge, and it's hard to look at. We want to design to reduce the impact of the disaster that's occurring. We want to design to endure the worst aspect of the disaster. We want to look at the time scales. Is it a week-long fire like we had down in Colorado Springs this summer? We didn't know it was going to be a week long. I mean, they were looking at a month. We had the highways closed, but it ended up being a week. Probably 2 weeks.
It was like 10 days.
Like 10 days. It's hard to actually predict. But this is part of designing for disaster. You look at something, a flood, a potential fire, and then you try to determine, how long is it going to last? How long is it going to affect our normal everyday behavior?
Just like Katrina, I wanted to get this in there. They knew, Colorado Springs knew that we have potential to burn. We still have potential to burn. We were actually lucky that the fire was where it was. We lost of 362 homes.
It was on the north side of that highway.
On the north side of the highway where there's plenty of roads. We still have the whole south side of the highway where there's no access, and if it gets over there, which we're still in fire season, this fire was outside of fire season, but it's just like Katrina. They knew the potential was there, but it's a huge amount of stepping up and money, equipment, people to prepare for something like a wildfire. So they just didn't do anything.
Yeah, our tendency is to move it out into the future, and just hope that it doesn't occur. But by doing that, we actually let, the future peoples or the future generations actually have to deal with the disaster. Now, a disaster profile, what's the cause? Pick a disaster, pick your favorite disaster, right? And there are many potential disasters. And what's the cause of it? What's the potential cause of it? Is it natural? Is it emerging in the natural world? Or is it man-made? And oftentimes these things are, we'll talk a little bit, these things are related. What's the possible frequency? Do we get a flood every year? Do we get a 10-year flood? Do we get a 50-year flood? Sometimes we get smaller floods, and then we'll get a 50-year flood or a 100-year flood. Do we want, what's the frequency of the scale of the disaster? We want to take that into account. What's the duration? A lot of natural disasters are very fast. A tornado comes through very quickly. And so the duration of the actual disaster is very quick, but it may take quite a while. It may affect us in such a way that it takes actually quite a while to get back to what we would call normal functioning. And so we want to take that into account as well. What's the speed of the onset? Now, natural disasters, sometimes you can predict them. There are man-made disasters, which we'll look at, and those are actually pretty predictable if you're willing to look at what's actually going on. And yet, that's a little, those are a little bit harder to determine. What's going to happen? It's been actually stated by the World Energy Commission that peak oil world peak oil happened in 2006. In 2010 they put out a report for the energy situation for the planet. And they actually used the term peak oil. And they said it happened in 2006. And yet, we have no idea. If you really know what's going on, you can see some of the influences. But as far as it really hitting all of us, we don't know when that's going to happen or what that's going to look like. We can speculate. We want to take a look at its potential destructive value. And destruction, again, is only in terms of what we would determine our normal functioning. But these are some of the profiles and things we want to think about when we're designing to mitigate disaster. What's the population density? A tornado on the prairie, we can sit there all day long and watch it. It's beautiful. But it's coming through our community, it actually has a different effect on the population where we live. So, is it predictable? A lot of natural disasters, natural phenomena that we would consider disasters. We know patterns in nature. We've been studying patterns in nature, so some of these can be predictable. I'm actually going to suggest the man-made disasters that are kind of occurring now are much more predictable than the natural ones. If you're willing to take a look, again, it's that egoic denial structure that disallows us from actually looking at what's happening. And can we control? Can we set up any types of controls that might mitigate the disaster? Some design tips. Again, analyze the possible frequency of the event. You can actually apply permaculture zone and sector analysis to the area, to the spot where the disaster may occur, and that helps mitigate. That helps setting up infrastructure that may mitigate the potential disaster. Practice precaution. If you know some place is a floodplain, don't build your McMansion on the floodplain.
Yeah.
That's just practicing precaution.
Don't build a
Or even your cabin. Even a cabin, even a sustainable straw bale house, don't build on the floodplain. Utilize all the permaculture principles in design. All of them are useful. All of them fit into a disaster mitigation program. This is the most important principle in permaculture. They're all important. But if you don't do this one, if you can't do this one, then all the others are going to miss their mark. Okay, again, and this is the hardest one. Because in this culture, we're not used to observing. Other cultures, you know, have a tradition or where observation and being quiet inside and noticing what's going on around you, it's more intact in those cultures than it is in the Western culture. So this one's very, very difficult in our culture to do. Okay, in general it's hard to do. You know, if you sit down and try to sit for half an hour and just observe what's going around you, you know, the internal dialogue is going to give you trouble. We all know that. But let alone if you're actually observing around the phenomenon of what we consider disaster, which is automatically the structure of denial, psychological denial, comes in, tries to move us away from looking at that. It makes it much more difficult to observe. So this is actually very challenging. Recognize the eco-function. Again, this comes back to the fact that the word disaster, the concept of disaster, is a human concept. It's human-centric. Okay? When there's cyclical flooding, it's nature's way of distributing resources. Okay? If we weren't here, there would, you know, everything would flow. Everything flows perfectly. Okay? And then what?
I can address this with
Yeah.
fire. You know, we've had this big fire, and now everybody's worried about landslides, mudslides, and we've had some. But so here we are. You know, fire suppression was, you know, Smokey the Bear was wrong. Fire suppression was not necessarily a good thing. And so now they are madly trying to mitigate all these mudslides. At the same time, the fire comes through and burns, and it can make hydrophobic soils. It so intensely burns the soil that it doesn't accept water. So if you think about the eco-function of a mudslide, here comes all this fresh soil, new seeds, everything comes up to the surface. So it actually has a natural function. But we look at it and go, oh my God, the soil's moving. We've got to keep everything the same. So that, to me, is trying to control all the mudslides, not another class 1 error, just like fire suppression was a class 1 error. And we did it for 100 years, and that's why we're dealing with what we're dealing with.
Right. And, you know, I mean, generally as a human population, what we've been doing is not considering. We don't even know really that nature, you know, we do, sort of, that nature is alive and functions and has purpose and intelligence and interaction, purposeful interaction. But we don't look at these things before we build cities. We just say, oh, this would be a great, you know, there's a reason we build by water, or we, you know, there's a reason, but it's usually, you know, suits us. Again, it's human-centric. So we don't really take into account really clearly and really observing, you know, what's going on in this area before we move in this huge population. Talk about disasters.
Oh, we'd be fine.
No, we would.
Okay, what's going on? Hit the arrow. Try the arrow. There you go.
Okay. Again, it's redistributing and recycling natural resources. Recognize the impact of population. Not as, you know, we recognize the impact on population. Okay, that's human-centric. But we rarely recognize the impact of population on the natural cycles and what that does to actually have what we would call natural disasters emerge. Okay, you know, we can have a direct effect we can have a direct effect on what we would call natural disasters emerging. It's starting to be seen that there's maybe an influence between fracking and earthquakes. Okay, that's starting to be recognized. Okay, but that's a direct effect. But a more subtle effect is the population, the large populations of human beings not living in alignment with nature. I mean, they're natural laws, and most of us, 7 billion of us, aren't really living in alignment with natural law. And this non-alignment, this type of living, actually creates a stressful influence in the actual natural environment, and that actually can give rise, you can look at natural, events taking place, windstorms and so, as a way to sort of mitigate the effect of a large body of human beings not living in accordance with natural law. So, the impact of population, which we rarely look at in this culture. I'm going to skip that one for now. There's two types of disasters, natural and man-made. Again, what do we see here? These are a number of natural, what we would call natural disasters. Again, some of these we saw in the first one. Can you see these?
Earthquake.
You can just call them out
Gone.
if you like.
Drought,
Yeah.
Tornado,
fire.
Tsunami, we don't have to worry about that one yet. Fire,
100-year flood.
that's
Yes.
true. That would be a hell of a flood, wouldn't it? So these are natural disasters that we can actually, in our area, and again, it's area specific. Okay, we don't have to worry about really tsunamis. We don't really have to worry about earthquakes at this point.
Not yet.
Which ones would we have to actually be concerned with?
Drought.
Drought,
fires.
fires, huh?
Blizzard.
Blizzard, tornado,
Ice storm.
ice storm, yeah, ice storms.
Avalanche.
Yeah, in some places.
In some places, avalanche, yeah. But these can all be looked at and determined if it, the probability of it happening, the frequency, and design methodology can be applied to mitigate against some of these disasters.
I think it goes to sleep in between.
Okay, and then there's man-made disasters. And there's two types. There's individual events, and there's systemic collapse. Now these are some examples of individual events. You see these? What are these?
Oil spill.
Yeah, oil spill, BP. That was a man-made disaster.
It's like pesticides and other chemicals in the lake or river. Probably green, like algae bloom because
Fires, explosions, terrorism, a man-made
Nukes.
individual event. That's, and a lot of these can be seen as individual events in themselves, but a lot of them have relationships with systemic collapse or the cultural activity we may be doing that leads to the individual event. That oftentimes isn't looked at. It's oftentimes isn't looked at.
Most of the time.
Most of the time we don't look at it. Again, we're in denial about why things are happening. What are all the types of systemic collapse that can occur? This is one. This is economic. Our economic system, the way we distribute goods and services, the way we use our money, the money that we use, how it's made, who makes it, all this is our economic activity. So that's a system that can serve us, and and for a while it has served some of us, can serve some of us and not others. Also, all systems can thrive if they're actually aligned with certain principles, or they can collapse if they're not. Okay? What other types of system, man-made system, can you think about that might have a propensity to collapse, or not only collapse but thrive? All these systems.
Industrial agriculture.
yeah.
Industrial agriculture, our food systems. Yeah.
Healthcare.
Healthcare is a great one.
Housing.
Energy.
Housing, energy, our energy systems, how we create our, bring in our energy into our culture. Housing, how we shelter people in this culture. How we think about sheltering people.
Our water system.
Water system.
Political system.
Our political system is certainly can thrive and serve us, serve the citizens, or it can actually not.
Would the stock market be considered economic?
Absolutely, that's like a subsystem of the whole economic system.
Judicial system?
Yeah, the criminal justice system, that's an oxymoron.
That's why we like Brian.
But there's, environmental, there's cultural, our cultural system, which seems a little vague. What is our cultural system? What's the American cultural system? What does that mean?
greed.
Huh?
It's greed.
Well, yes, it's great. Yes, right now it's, it's been based more on, well, that's part of it, yeah. But there's a lot of elements in our cultural system that can thrive, and thriving means it supports people. It supports human beings. And collapsing means it actually doesn't support human beings being able to live healthy and free. And so, of course, our food systems were mentioned, water, energy, our transportation systems. I mean, really, we're selling more and more and more cars on this planet. I mean, it's just insane. It's like, our car is sustainable. Our car is sustainable in China, in India. They all want to live like us. They're all, China and India are all mimicking us. They all want to live like us. That's what they're doing right this second.
I'd like to draw a distinction here with cultural.
Yeah.
Culture is something that'll never go away. Culture is teaching our kids, growing our own food, singing and dancing, having friends. That's really our culture, our artwork. And we can do art, just ask Marco Lamb, you can draw in the ground, in the dirt with a stick and create things. But the civilization has taken over that, and that's really what portends to collapse, and that's what we were talking about earlier. So, because culture will always, because that's with our species.
Yeah.
But our civilization that we have hung all of our dependency on, that's what's prone, that's what's going to collapse.
Yeah.
Sometime soon.
And civilization can be seen as a particular type of culture, right? That either serves us or it doesn't, and that's, that's a big debate.
Yes.
Not here, but elsewhere. It does go to sleep.
Yeah, I think it goes through.
Come on.
They say don't buy new tech, fix your old stuff. Yeah, there are a few drawbacks to that.
Okay. So here's some images and some examples of what we would call systemic collapse. Collapse that takes place on a broader scale than just an individual collapse. Again, we can see a variety of different types. There's housing collapse, and the housing, which way, what?
The positive proof of global
Oh, you like it?
Positive proof of global warming, from the knickers to the G-string.
We talked about financial and economic collapse.
Unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences, money collapse. It's happened before in other cultures. It's hard to believe, our currency could go into hyperinflation at some point. That's a possibility. It's not going to happen soon, but it's happened in other cultures that makes your money worthless. And then you start dealing in a different type of currency that's non-monetary.
Like Greece.
Like what? Like Greece. Well, yes, you see it happening in other places. Iceland, Greece. All of these currencies and government structures have collapsed. But, it's interesting. When I talk about collapse, of course, I forget. I'm with this all the time. I forget what people think about when I talk about collapse, that we're all going to be gone. It's like death. Collapse doesn't mean the human race is going to be gone. It means we're going to be living differently we have to learn to live differently than we do right now. Now, for most people, most egos, that sounds like, a disaster. If I can't drive my car with no one in it, we took the hub lane. You know what hub lanes are? I mean, it was like, whoa, do we take it or do we not? It's like, and yet, okay, every time Becky and I come up, it's like, whoa, what is it? Is it okay? There's two people in the car, right? So it says, okay, let's try it. A zoom, and it's great. We're the only ones in the hub lane. 80, 90, 100 miles an hour. It's like the Autobahn. It's great. I love it. But I don't even know why I'm talking about this. But,
It's real.
It's real, yeah. And no one else is in there. And, it's our culture. So these are different examples. And, this is happening right now. All these collapses are happening right now. Our culture is in irreversible and rapid collapse in all of these areas. Again, we don't like to look at this. Let's take the food system, for example. Food system has been in irreversible and rapid collapse for decades. What are some of the elements of the food system that are in collapse? You all know this.
Pollinators.
Your pollinators are disappearing. Just that one element, we're sunk.
Soil fertility.
Soil fertility, forget fertility.
Just soil.
Topsoil's gone.
Yeah.
It's gone.
Obesity.
Obesity, the health of our nation. And what?
Lack of farmers.
Lack of farmers, lack of rural farmers, lack of urban farmers. Lack of close, fresh food. Fresh, the word fresh is a joke. You go into 7-Eleven, Everything's fresh. The donuts are fresh. You know, the Twinkies are fresh. Right? I mean, decades ago, that would have been illegal. That actually would have been illegal. That's had to creep in on us slowly. Okay? It's a profitized food system.
Exactly. The governmental side.
It's a profitized food system.
Our seed sources, the
Subsidies.
Monsantos.
Seed sources, Monsanto's. But, you know, yeah, it's profitized. And you profitize, if you profitize, it doesn't mean you can't make profit. There are non-profit companies, they all make profit. That used to confuse me. I used to go, non-profit corporation, okay, fine, doesn't make any profit, right? No, that's what I thought. And then I realized, no, it's not that it doesn't make any profit, it has to make profit. Profit is, you know, embedded in nature. But in nature shares all its profits with everything around it. Okay, non-profit corporation makes profit. Its purpose, it's just that it's been set up as a legal entity, so its purpose is not profit. Its purpose is for whatever its function is, right? A credit union is to serve its shareholders, not to make profit. A bank, its only purpose is to make a profit. That's its only purpose. So it doesn't care about you, it doesn't care about your children, it doesn't care about the land, it doesn't care about, it legally can't care about it legally can't care about anything. It legally can't take any action. Anything other than making a profit. Okay, and our culture is embedded in that paradigm right now. A profitized culture. And so our food system is profitized. That means they don't care about the quality of the food. They don't care who dies, who gets sick. They don't care about obesity. You know, right now our profitized food system is in collapse. Of course, it's in collapse. Okay, it will collapse, not only in its nutritional value. It's been said that our nutritional value in our food has declined 50% since the 1950s. Okay, that's a, you know, if you think about that, that's a huge crisis happening right now. Everyone's sicker. Everyone's, you know, let alone obesity. Now the food system, the profitized food system, serves the profitized medical system. It's a perfect relationship. Right? We get them, you know, we feed them food that makes them ill, and then they go right into the medical system. So this is an example of a system, a systemic collapse in one of the human designed systems. Now what's beautiful about this is design for disaster. Our culture has actually been designed for disaster. It's brilliant. It's used principles and ethics to design itself into a disaster. The good news about that is that we can design ourselves out of disaster. That's the good news. It's just a matter of using different principles and different ethics. And you know, we're doing, you know, Brian and Amanda are doing that at the farm here. We're using a different set of ethics and principles to design a food system that's actually sustainable and serves the human physiology, serves the human body, as opposed to actually, you know, fills it with disease. Wake up. Wake up. Wake up. You gotta speak to it nicely. Okay, well, the last point here is that the trend on this planet is towards further urbanization. That's all. We've been urbanizing. We've been moving people out of the rural areas for the last 100, 150 years. We've been moving them into cities. It's not necessarily to serve people, okay? But it tends to. I want you to be aware of this trend. That the trend is towards larger and larger urban areas. That's, you know, both on one hand, that's something to be aware of as far as, you know, disaster, but it's also, if you use the right principles and the right kind of perspective on this, and the right design principles, that can actually, you know, urban areas of a lot of people can actually come together and redesign their environments, even living together like that, so to meet all of our needs. All of our needs can be, you know, designed even in large cities, especially in large cities, actually. There's an advantage to large cities over rural areas. There can be.
And I've heard the idea that closely packed living situation is a more efficient use of energy.
Yes, more efficient use of energy, there's water, you know, there's land, there's huge land.
It's technically much more sustainable.
Much more
than being
sustainable.
rural, because you don't have to drive, there's more water off the roofs, there's more labor to do the things that we want to do. I mean, we've been doing all this labor with fossil fuels which we have to get back to human scale and start using people and animals. Remember horses? You know, that do work for us.
And culture.
So the cities, you know, and permaculture would say, I think about all those million of acres of Monsanto land, Cargill, of, you know, dying industrial farms, and we don't want to move out there. We need to give that land back to the earth so that earth can start setting up the base again so we can actually survive here for a long time. So cities are actually very much more sustainable. We just have to catch up with it and bring our friends and create these systems, and we can be very happy.
And plus it preserves the land like outside of the cities instead of a lot of people moving out there and oh I'm gonna have a farm and I'm gonna have a farm.
And
That's right.
There's
It
a
allows
lot
it-
of people that base their sustainability on having property or having a lot. There's lots of property in cities. We just worked on our last design course on a school garden. It's a fabulous design. And the head of the board was sitting next to me and he goes, the school board, he goes, gosh, we've got lots and lots like this. We should be doing that on every single one. I'm going, yeah, you think? That'd be great. So there's actually lots of land in urban, and if you look at what's happening climatically, there's less water, but there's more water off of all the buildings. Every time you build a building, it's an opportunity to harvest water.
Yeah, and it allows some of this land that's been developed to move back into Zone 5. Permaculture Zone 5.
We need Zone 5.
We need Zone 5.